Justin Fields is taking the steering wheel of the Chicago Bears offense, but for how long? I'm Dan Wiederer, joined by former colleague Rich Campbell. He's got a bad case of FOMO this week. Rich, how we doing?
The FOMO sets in when you have these big moments for the Bears. Just because I've moved on in life, according to last week's title, doesn't mean you don't miss it. And what a cool week for Bears fans to get to see Justin Fields get the starters reps, have the package put in for him, the entire game plan, and let's see what he does.
You heard me say at the outset that for how long, right? And that's the confusion in Chicago this week, because Matt Nagy stumbled through his words on Monday, came back and corrected things a little bit later on Monday, then fully corrected things during his news conference on Wednesday, basically saying that Andy Dalton is still their starter when healthy, qualifying it, of course, with saying a lot can happen between now and then, between the time that Justin Fields makes his first start and the time that Andy has the green light from the medical staff to again resume playing NFL football as a starter. And so we walk into this game in Cleveland. Tough road challenge for Justin Fields to make his debut against a pretty good defense. And they're not world beaters, but a pretty good defense. Mm-hmm. And it leads you to these question marks on what should the Bears be doing with their offense? What should they be doing with their long-term vision? And what does this mean for Matt Nagy, right? And I think that is a great place to start with this conversation, because this is a huge, huge moment in Matt Nagy's 2021 season and sort of the judgment of who he is as a offensive overseer, right? And that means that he's got to prove things to a lot of people that he hasn't proven things to yet.
Offensive overseer, and then the subheading under that is quarterback developer.
Yeah.
And so
play caller, right?
Yeah, right. Oh, all of it, right? And how that all works together. And so you go back to what we talked about ahead of the week 1 game, Dan, and it was about potentially the organization's interest in Justin Fields not necessarily overlapping harmoniously with Matt Nagy's investment in the quarterback position and what he needed to get out of Andy Dalton and the season, right? Just the win-loss record. Well, now that decision is taken out of it. And in a way, it's a best case scenario for Nagy, because the choice to go to Fields was taken out of his hands and just made by the injury gods, right? And so now Nagy has to prove that he's the guy to continue developing Fields, right? And we talked about this in week 1, what Brad Biggs, my former colleague and your current colleague at the Tribune, researched about rookie quarterbacks who had a new coach in year 2. And the example we talked about on the show was Justin Herbert, right? Like a lot of talent. You saw his talent, but the decision makers in Los Angeles decided they wanted a new coach to bring that out of him.
Yeah.
And so we know Fields is going to make plays off script.
Yeah.
So he's going to do things that are exciting and could possibly change games on his own, right? That's his thing. What's Matt going to do within the confines and parameters of a system to bring the best out of Fields as a passer and keep things on script? So that's what I'm really eager to see. And we'll see how long that develops, right? It's a multi-game process, or at least it needs to be.
Friend of the channel, Mark Potash, makes a good point, and he has stated this really back since May, and saying that there's a greater chance that Justin Fields makes Matt Nagy look like a great coach than there is of Matt Nagy being the reason that Justin Fields becomes a great quarterback, right? And so that's a good starting point for this discussion. And Matt has to realize, and I said this in the second half last week when the Bears were struggling offensively against the Bengals, even as their defense was humming, that this is a difficult thing for Matt Nagy to walk into, because he is unproven still as an offensive overseer. And so now every mistake that Justin Fields makes, whether it's just simply the byproduct of being a rookie who didn't see things right and screws up in play because he's inexperienced and doesn't know what he's looking at, is going to be blamed in Chicago on Matt Nagy, right? Mm-hmm. You already hear the clamor of that from fans. Oh, the play calling stinks. Every mistake the quarterback makes now is directly having the finger pointed at Matt Nagy. Matt has to be aware of that. He doesn't have to be consumed by that, but he has to be aware that he's got a lot of people on the outside questioning whether he is the right person to take this offense to the next level, now with a quarterback who has many gifts as a passer and as a runner. And so it's challenging, Rich, because we get a full half from Justin Fields last week in Cincinnati. We get a full half where the defense is playing as well as it's played in several years. They get 4 takeaways.
That complimentary football we talked about.
4 consecutive possessions, right? The only touchdown they score off those takeaways is when Roquan Smith takes his interception across the goal line himself. The other 3 takeaways, the Bears only scored 6 points off of, despite having the ball in Bengals territory each time. That's an offense that leaves you scratching your head and says, oh my God, you get 1st and goal from the 9 and you can't get it in the end zone. What are we doing here? They have to find ways to take advantage of a defense that's not going to get you 4 takeaways and a touchdown every week. Probably not going to get you 4 takeaways and a touchdown in Cleveland on Sunday. And so now it's all about, can you set Justin Fields up for success? And for me, as they go into this first game, it's really kind of a trial and error phase of them trying to figure out, okay, identify Justin's gifts, figure out what he does well, marry that with concepts and plays in the playbook that we've seen in training camp in the preseason that he's comfortable with, and try to let him play fast. We haven't seen a Matt Nagy quarterback play fast and play comfortable. He's gone through Mitch Trubisky. He's gone through Nick Foles. Andy Dalton was playing fine, right? Like they kept lauding how well Andy looked how good he looked on the first drive against the Bengals when he led them down there on a impressive touchdown drive. But they scored 14 points in the opener and basically 7 points in the first half against the Bengals last week. So it's not like they're exploding. And so now Matt has to show that he can turn Justin Fields loose in a way that brings out his greatest gifts, allows him to play fast. And as you mentioned, hopefully somewhere in there, Justin Fields takes 2, 3, 4, 5 bad play calls, goes off script with them, scrambles, stays on the move and hits a throw downfield and uses those ad-lib gifts to elevate this offense.
So let's extrapolate that even further. What will that look like? What would that success look like? To me, I think about, because you think about the scheme.
Yeah.
Playing fast, but also creating opportunities with play design. So we're talking about misdirection behind the line of scrimmage that creates numbers advantages to the play side. We're talking about finding open receivers quickly and in rhythm, right? That's another thing, that playing fast, hitting the back foot, and then the ball's coming out. What else do you think it looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to do things that get him on the move. I think you have to understand that you can scheme him as both a runner and as a passer. This guy's got great deep ball accuracy. You've got to figure out a way to open up the vertical passing game, which hasn't been a strength. Obviously, he throws a deep ball against the Bengals on Sunday, which would have been a touchdown, and Allen Robinson, the best receiver on the team, lets it go right through his arms. That's devastating. Mm-hmm. You're going to have folks in the fan base call that out and say, if he had hit this, right? Well, and then you counter that with, well, if Justin Fields hadn't false started twice on a drive by flinching and not having the cadence communication proper with Sam Mustipher, well, then maybe they have a touchdown on another drive. And if Justin Fields doesn't throw an interception when he correctly identifies cover 0 but doesn't see a linebacker dropping in the fourth quarter, the Bears run away with that game instead of having to hold on for dear life at the end against a, middle to bottom tier road foe. Right. Mm-hmm. And so that's where you just have to understand that there are going to be pronounced growing pains in this process. And in order to get around the growing pains, you have to do everything you can to cater to Justin Fields' strengths. Again, I don't think there's a lot of outside confidence, particularly in Chicago, that this coaching staff is ready to do that at a high level. I think it also challenges Matt because Matt has talked, this offense is something that you've got to build to. It's going to look different in year 4 than it did in year 1. Well, guess what? Now you've got to come back. It's like chutes and ladders, right? You hit the chute and you got to come way back down the board because you're starting with a guy who can't handle as much as the veteran that you had comfort with. So it gets really complicated for Matt to have patience, to rein himself in and how much he wants to put in a game plan that hasn't been a strength of his over his time here. And so you understand why there's this factor that comes along with the excitement of turning loose the number 11 overall pick and the future of your franchise for his first NFL start.
Yeah, I hesitate to introduce a Patrick Mahomes comparison, but Nagy was involved in that situation. Yeah. And so let's just latch onto it for just a second. And when you think about Mahomes' brilliance, how much of that credit goes to Andy Reid, right? I mean, I think that's a fair question, the way it's applied to this situation, because your point and Potsy's point about credit and perception, that's real. That's a real part of how this is all going to work out. And when I think about Mahomes' brilliance, I think about him, backpedaling from the line of scrimmage and using the rocket arm to find guys wide open because the play has been extended. Well, that's Patrick Mahomes' gift. I'm not so sure Andy Reid gets credit for that, right? But then again, Reid has a track record of coordinating great offenses, whether it was in, early in his career in Green Bay or with the Eagles for all those years. So he's got credibility, whereas Matt doesn't. I would also add that, as you have so eloquently pointed out, it's not like there's the most sophisticated evaluation structure by Bears ownership here, right?
Right. No, right.
So maybe we're thinking about it at a level that George McCaskey isn't. But I think I'd like to stay at our level for this.
Which is terrifying, right? Like, it's terrifying. And sometimes you hope that, like, are you reading? Are you watching enough content to say, oh, yeah, maybe we should think about X, Y, and Z here? Because, Rich, I brought this up, and I want to bounce this off you before we go here. It's this idea that, we talked about it previously about the lack of a bullseye for the 2021 season. And it seems as if, my question this week is, if you're going to turn Justin Fields loose to start, even though it's due to an injury to Andy Dalton, what is the point of turning back when Andy's healthy again? You've already identified Justin as your quarterback of the future. Dalton's on a one-year deal. You're wasting time and resources by trying to make him the guy that wins football games with you. But it speaks to an organization that thinks that they either, again, can win or must win in 2021 for things to stay on track. And so that's where it gets complicated here, because I don't personally believe that you can have your cake and eat it too, which means prioritizing Justin Fields' development, also try to contend for something meaningful in 2021. There's Bears fans, delusional Bears fans on the outside, sorry folks in the comment section, that believe that Justin Fields can make this team a division champion. I don't see that being the case. And so if you're going to turn him loose and say prioritize his development, then you've got to be willing to live with 7-10.
Well, I would just say this, that when Matt Nagy said earlier this week that Andy Dalton's the starter when healthy, it didn't mean anything to me.
Right.
Those are just words. And it's something, that's the exact type of development or news that gets you from Monday to Sunday in the NFL, right? All of this will be decided on Sundays.
And the next few probably.
And teams have a saying in the preseason, right? We don't cut players, players cut themselves. This is that's
John Fox's favorite saying.
I like that. And I believe it was a Vinny Serrato saying too, back with Washington all those years ago. But the sort of the reverse applies here. Justin Fields is going to tell us whether he deserves this shot. He's going to tell Matt Nagy. He's going to make the decision for Matt. And it goes back to what we're talking about of, okay, then how much input, how much influence really does Matt have? Well, of course he has some. He's got to put him in position. But as they start to work together, as they feel each other out, let's say the results are middling. If Matt Nagy gets to 2 weeks from now or whenever Andy Dalton comes back and says, you know what, after working with Justin, we're going to stick with him. And what I told you 2 weeks ago turns out it wasn't true. Nobody's going to care that he didn't tell the truth, right? It's just going to be like, okay, you figured it out. I mean, he's just telling that question to go away. Let's just do what's in front of us this week, and the rest will sort itself out. So I'm with you. It wouldn't make a lot of sense as long as Justin Fields isn't a disaster, which he's not going to be.
So, right. So that's my closing point, is that it wouldn't be, I won't go so far as to say it's a worst case scenario if Andy Dalton starts for you again, but it's a bad case scenario, right? Because it means the rookie quarterback who you believe in isn't able to handle things on game day the way you hope he's able to handle things on game day. The one thing I really like about Justin Fields to this point, we don't know him really well yet, and it's too early to put this in the final report card, but he doesn't seem to be a kid who is a victim of pressing, right? And that was something that really, really affected Mitch Trubisky during his career. When he started pressing more. And when he started pressing more, he started pressing more. We used the phrase in 2019 that he struggled with struggling. Justin Fields doesn't seem to have that in him, which is a plus for this organization, because I think it's going to give them a little bit more comfort than Mitch did. When things start to get a little shaky, you don't feel like, oh my God, we got to get the lifeboats out, right? Like this is rocky and we've got to start scrambling. So that's one plus that Justin Fields has going for him. And hopefully he can show that. And again, a tough road environment in the dog pound on Sunday.
Well, you said just a second ago that if they went back to Andy Dalton, it would be a sign that Fields isn't handling what he needs to handle on game day. And I think what you mean by that is not necessarily that he's making mistakes, because he's going to make mistakes. Yeah. But he's not responding to those mistakes.
Or just seems overwhelmed, right?
Right. I mean, you can make a mistake, but if you're learning from it and you're progressing, you can live with the mistakes. And because of what you just said about his makeup, you'd expect him to be able to do that better, certainly way better than Mitch Trubisky did. It was a big problem of his. I'm not necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily say that's why he failed in Chicago, but it didn't help him, and it probably contributed. And we'll get to see how Fields handles the adversity, because, like you said, touchdown underdog on the road at a playoff tested team that's playing well right now. But on the other hand, look, nobody expects you to win. Just go play, right? Go play, go get better, and compete and see what happens.
There's going to be some Justin Fields fans in the stands in Ohio. There's some Buckeyes fans there as well. So it'll be a fun first game for Justin Fields as a starter. We'll see a lot about who he is as a quarterback. We'll be able to judge it going forward, and there's going to be a bigger sample size. Listen, Rich, there was folks in Chicago that when the plan was publicized to bring Justin Fields along slowly, were fearful that they wouldn't see him much, if at all, in 2021. And all I said is, listen, folks, he's going to play. He's going to play a lot in 2021. He's probably going to play soon. Andy Dalton's injury accelerates the timeline. It's only week 3. We're not even out of September. Justin Fields is making his first career NFL start. That's good news and exciting for the folks of Chicago. It's good news and exciting for us because we'll have a lot more to talk about. That's Rich Campbell. I'm Dan Wiederer. Bears-Browns, Sunday, noon.